Now, do you remember the other day in one of my rants where I said, if I have to, I will go to the effort of ranking every single signing Celtic have made whilst Peter Lawwell was in power at the club? Do you remember that? Well, that's what we're doing today. Not quite a tier list, but close. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. If you haven't already, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. It would be much appreciated. We're kind of going down the tier list route today as I look back over the last 20 years of Celtic transfer business. This could be a long one, so bear with me. Let's do that. So, I know what you're thinking, Ryan, how are we going to do this if we aren't tier listing? Well, say hello to my big spreadsheet. I have spent some time over the past hour or so collating the information of signings Celtic have made over the past 20 years since Peter Lawwell rose to a prominent position of power at the club. And we have a list of 154 players to talk about today. Now, that could take an eternity. The way that I go on, the motor mouth that I have, we could literally be here for hours discussing every single one of these players, but I'm going to make it my aim to do it in as efficient a manner as possible. Now, as we all know, Celtic fans are currently staging a form of mutiny towards the Celtic board. There has been votes of no confidence placed by many a supporter organisation, and it looks as though real change could be coming soon. But one guy who has been ever present in that very prominent role of both CEO and chairman for the best part of the last 25 years has been Peter Lawwell, and he's been one of the guys who has banged the drum about how good our business has been, how well we've been ran as a business. But today, I want to truly see how good that business has been when it comes to the footballing operations, because that transfer model that we speak about, yeah, plenty of good examples of it working well, but I want to figure out once and for all, over this past 25 years, if it's been as good as it should be. So as I said, Peter Lawwell got into power at the beginning of the 2003-04 campaign, so we are going to look through every season since then and evaluate the transfer business on a scale from A to F. Now, it's pretty self-explanatory, and you can see right here how I am going to try and go through them today. The grades go as follow: A for amazing, B for good, C for fine, D for didn't work out for various reasons, maybe something to do with homesickness or something like that, E for poor, and F for total disasters. And we are going to rank all 154 permanent signings that the club have made whilst Peter Lawwell has been in a prominent position at the club. Now, this is permanent signings only, so we aren't talking about loan players we've seen over the years, the likes of Patrick Roberts, the likes of Robbie Keane. They are not included in this list. We're talking permanent signings only, the ones that we have spent money on, or at least spent wages on. There are a few omissions, I'll make that clear right now, the likes of youth players that we've poached from other academies that never really made it to the senior team. Those sorts of players have been left out, so really the total should be above 154, but I've tried to carefully choose who makes the list and who doesn't. And very, very quickly, before we go any further, one last disclaimer. I know that Peter Lawwell isn't single-handedly responsible for all of the transfer failings or all of the transfer successes. He is just a prominent figure that's existed at the club for this last 2 decades. There has been managers who've came and gone, Martin O'Neill to Gordon Strachan to Tony Mowbray to Neil Lennon, so on and so forth. There has been many a head of recruitment at the club, many different scouts that have worked at the club. It's a joint effort to make recruitment successful, and it's not just down to one man. And it would be very cheap of me to blame all of this on Peter Lawwell, but this is how I'm going to look at things today. We'll talk about that at the end, and we'll talk about everybody as we go on. Aye, this could take some time today, and I want to go through it as quickly as we possibly can. We're going to go through it season by season, and hopefully we'll get there somehow. So we have to go back to the start, and we begin, of course, with the 2003-04 season, where in typical Peter Lawwell fashion, Celtic didn't get much business done. We made one permanent signing that season, and it was Stephen Pearson from Motherwell. As you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, a couple of loan signings came in as well, but Stephen Pearson was the only permanent signing, and it starts off pretty bland, I would say. We probably start off with a C. Stephen Pearson done maybe what was expected of him. Started off a bit more brightly than the way it petered out through injuries. He was a fine signing for Celtic, but I wouldn't say it was any more than that. I think that outside circumstances made it a bit difficult for him, but he lived his dream playing for Celtic. I think the biggest criticism that people have here is maybe that off the back of that very successful 03-04 campaign, we didn't get going the way that we should have with the transfer market, but we had a really good squad. Change was happening at the club. It's maybe understandable to an extent. I was 3 years old. I wasn't there at the time. But only the one signing to talk about. The 2004-05 window wasn't much better. Celtic really didn't kick on either in this transfer season. You can see on the right hand side of your screen there, not a lot of money spent. In fact, 2 undisclosed fees for Icelandic Finnbogason and Bjarnason was the only money spent by the club, and they weren't exactly successful signings. Juninho probably popping out as the best of all of these signings, and even at that, it wasn't like it was a signing that Celtic had for a long time that came in and really changed the team. He was a good quality player, but it wasn't much more than that. This was still a really poor window for Celtic, all things considered. I mean, can anybody even really remember Stefan Henshaws? Really? I think we'll figure out as this video goes along who deserves to be an E and who deserves to be an F, but considering money was spent on both Finnbogason and Bjarnason, I think that's a total disaster. I think they played a combined 2 games competitively for Celtic. Something daft like that. Complete waste of money. Shouldn't have been anywhere near the club apparently. Stefan Henshaws I give an E because at least he played a few times. 6-month contract. Wasn't much more expected than what he was brought in to do. And Juninho just about gets a C. I think that could even be quite generous, to be quite honest. But he, once again, technically quite a decent player. Just didn't spend a lot of time at Celtic. So as we get into the 2005-06 season, we saw the first major change at Celtic. Gordon Strachan came in for Martin O'Neill and Celtic started undergoing some change on the park. Of course, Henrik Larsson was well gone by this point. The likes of Sutton, Hartson, etc. all getting towards the end of their career. Change was needed, and we needed to breathe fresh life into the Celtic team. Peter Lawwell and the rest of the higher-ups had a job to do in this summer, and they had to invest, and they did, to be fair. There was good money spent in this window. As you can see, we spent $2.5 million on both Shunsuke Nakamura and Maciej Zurawski, likes of money spent on Artur Boric, Mark Wilson, etc. Money was spent, and Gordon Strachan started getting his men in, and we started making our first good signings of the Peter Lawwell era. Am I being generous again? Maybe, but I think that both Mark Wilson and Maciej Zurawski both deserve the B category for their signings. Mark Wilson was a servant at Celtic for many years following his signing, done a good job whenever needed. I think he was very reliable. He gets in there for a fullback, done exactly what you expected of him. I think he was a good solid signing. And the likes of Maciej Zurawski as well, coming in at the stage of his career, which he did, he delivered what we expected. He was well liked by the supporters as well. He wasn't a superstar by any means, but he was a good player. And then of course the 2 big ones, Shunsuke Nakamura and Artur Boric. Nakamura being arguably one of the best signings we've made in Peter Lawwell's time at the club. Artur Boric, historic for so many different reasons. Those 2 are 2 of the first real big signings that we made, I would say. The rest of the window didn't really follow through with that, but we at least saw improvement. The rest was poor, to say the least. And I don't care what anybody says, Roy Keane falls into the F category as well. I mean, he came in, he lost to Clyde. It was just a pointless waste of time for everybody. Waste of time, wages, everything. The same with Dion Dublin. I mean, we spent £1.5 million on Adam Virgo, played about 15 games for Celtic. Yeah, the rest of the window is really forgettable. Maybe I'm being harsh on poor Paul Telfer here, but he was hardly a great player. Yeah, luckily for us, we got Nakamura and Boric in this window because it was almost a complete disaster. I just realised actually colour coding it as I go makes it easier to understand how many good players we have compared to bad. And Christ almighty, it's not off to a good start. 06, 07. I feel like I can start to remember things at this point. It was a very mixed transfer window. Gordon Strachan started getting more pieces of the puzzle to what he wanted to do. The likes of Paul Hartley, Jan Vennegoor of Hesselink, Lee Naylor, Gary Caldwell came in. They would be, parts of the team for a few years, or at least until Gordon Strachan left the club. But there still was the sprinklings of shite through there. I feel like this is as accurate an assessment I can make of the 06-07 window. I think there's a lot more good than bad, even if there's nothing extraordinary there. I mean, as I said, we had the solid arrivals that played a part in Strachan's team for a long time. Even the likes of Kenny Miller, who we all pretty much hate, still made an impact in the only season he was with the club. Jiri Arisic wasn't terrible, played some big parts in Champions League games. It's really like Derek Riordan, Mark Brown. I always feel harsh saying that backup keepers and stuff are terrible signings, but Mark Brown was pretty terrible. Yeah, Presley, Brown, Riordan, Snow and Gravison. Listen, I know we all love the stories about Gravison, but good God almighty, there was a lot of surrounding circumstances at his time at Celtic. Despite, being an absolute nutter, he had some ups, but had a lot of downs as well. Yeah, it didn't work out with the money we spent on him, I would say. It was a bit of a mixed window, certainly far from terrible, but could have been better. By the way, just want to throw in the point that this is subjective. I would love to hear your opinions and your ratings of all these players if you have the time in your day to go through it like me. But just keep in mind, it's one man's opinion. And up until about this point, which we're getting to now, I have very limited memory about that era. So this is where I can properly talk about things, I feel like. 2007-8, a historic season as Celtic beat Rangers to the league title late on in the campaign. Of course, we made it 3 in a row. Gordon Strachan was getting, I would say, fairly back to Celtic manager. I mean, you can look at the fees on screen. Keep in mind, this was 2007. The money spent here was quite sizable for that point in time. Could we have spent more? Yeah, of course, probably. But at the same time, this was a lot of money. The likes of 4.4 million on Scott Brown, 1.9 million on Andreas Hinkle, 2.5 million on Massimo Donati. For a club like Celtic at that moment in time, it was a lot of money spent. And Gordon Strachan certainly was seeing backing. And we made some good signings this summer. Felt like it was actually fairly easy to grade the 07-08 season. I mean, Scott McDonald and Scott Brown were two magnificent signings, especially Brown, who went on to play for the club for, however many years it ended up being, the most successful captain in the club's history. He's obviously an A. Scott McDonald, great goal scorer, led us to a lot of trophies up front. Yeah, I think he walked straight into the A category for me as well. Also, Robson and Hinkle, two solid signings that played their part. I mean, Hinkle wasn't even here that long, but he was really, really good at his short time at Celtic. And the only real kind of slip-ups here were Mizuno, Hutchison, Killen and Doumbé, who all between them must have played like less than 30 games for Celtic. So, every year you're going to have players like that. You're going to have players that you maybe brought in expecting to do something at some point and then just never did. There was a lot of that in these years at Celtic. The likes of Chris Killen, who I'm sure the club would have had high hopes for, and then just really amounted to nothing. Whether that's through the fault of Peter Lawwell or not, you could make an argument. Is it short-sighted? Is it just... I don't know. I think that's a pretty solid summer, though. And then that was followed up by 08-09, of course, a year where Celtic went on to lose the league title. It ended up being Gordon Strachan's last season as Celtic manager. It wasn't a very memorable campaign. And the window, it was okay, I guess. There was obviously big names there like Samaras, Sean Maloney returning to the club. But then there was, Milan Masoon. If you remembered his name before you clicked on this video, tell me, because you deserve a reward of some form. Who the fuck is that? So some absolute duds in there, as you would expect. The Twardzik twins. What was the point? We spent money on them, by the way. Both of them combined played for Celtic 5 times. Milan Masoon, once again, who 500 grand spent on him, by the way. 500 grand on a guy that I can't even remember existing. Willow Flood, the less said the better. Some duds in there. Niall McGinn, I feel harsh giving an E, but he was just never really good enough for Celtic. We spent 300 grand on him. Good player, just wasn't Celtic level of good. Went on to do well elsewhere. And then the rest of the window was fine. Samaras, I would actually personally give an A, but he was hot and cold, so I put him as B, because I know people would kill me for giving him an A. Crosas is the only one that I was unsure about, but he was unbelievable at times. Crosas, great player, just didn't work out for other reasons. I think he fell out with Neil Lennon, if I remember rightly. Just didn't really work for him after that. So he moved on. Probably could have done more at the club, but still love the guy and love seeing him back at Celtic Park at any opportunity. It's just a shame that once again we carry on this trend of spending thousands, if not millions, on duds. And now we head into a new era at the club. The Tony Mowbray one we just sort of bypassed there. We're into the Neil Lennon era. And talking about duds, there are plenty amongst the years that Neil Lennon was manager. And I'm just going to cross a lot of them off the list very, very quickly. I apologise, we didn't bypass the Tony Mowbray era at all. In fact, I realised that as I went to go and grade Marc-Antoine Fortuny. which was an unfortunate era in itself. As you can see, I've done the duty of going through everybody that was signed between 2009 and 2014, and we signed an incredible amount of duds, and we wasted a substantial amount of money. Now, I'm not going to go through every single one of them individually, and you can quickly glance through and see what you agree with and what you disagree with, but there are so many duds here for different reasons. The likes of Teemu Pukki, who wasn't terrible, but for the fee that we paid and for the expectations that was on him, didn't work out at all. The likes of Danny Fox, I've said, didn't work out for reasons. Had a fine spell at Celtic, ended up leaving prematurely. Zaluska gave that sort of same rating as well because he had to compete with the likes of Fraser Forster, but just so many duds for big money that we spent. The likes of Efran Juarez, who once again wasn't the worst player I've ever seen, but we spent a lot of money on the guy. And there's just players in there that if I put myself in the shoes of my current day Celtic supporter, that we should never have been signing. The likes of Freddie Ljungberg, who was 10, 15 years past his sell-by date. Like, if that happened now, if we went and signed somebody who was at the peak of their powers 10 years ago and was approaching retirement, I'd think to myself, what are we doing? So I'm putting myself in that same boat now. And players that we signed domestically that were just never going to be good enough for Celtic either, that were questionable signings. There was so many of them throughout the years. Yet there was just, in the likes of Dirk Berigter, oh my, what a horrible era those kind of 4 or 5 years were at the club in terms of signings. But we did manage to find some diamonds in the rough. Because for as many duds as there was in that era, we also found some of the best players who have played for Celtic in the 21st century. The likes of Virgil van Dijk, the likes of Victor Wanyama. Even I've been generous to give A ratings to the likes of Emilio Izagiri and Chris Commons because they were such influential members of the squad. And the likes of Commons, who maybe hasn't aged as an all-timer of a player or anything like that, he was brilliant for Celtic. He was the talisman for a good couple of years at the club, and he was relied upon heavily for goals. And then there's the likes of Gary Hooper, who of course just strolls into that A category. Virgil van Dijk, Ki Sung Young, who was technically one of the best players I've seen in my lifetime at Celtic, made a good bit of money on him when we sold him to Swansea City as well. We did manage to find some true diamonds in the rough. And then you've got Kyle, who was solid for us, Adam Matthews, who was solid for us. Yeah, there was some good players, but it just doesn't help that when you look through, so the amount of E's and F's for duds like Oliver Capel, for every Virgil van Dijk, there is 4 Oliver Capels. And so arrived the Ronny Deila era. We were truly in the trenches when it came to the transfer policy at this point. It felt like Celtic sort of gave up in a way. Even though we were still spending bits of money, the likes of 2.3 million on Stefan Skepovic, some of the names coming through the door were questionable. And we'll talk about Colin Kazim-Richards and Carlton Cole in a moment. But Ronny Deila came in. Celtic had kind of accepted there was no real competition in Scotland, that we weren't a Champions League club. That felt like the mentality of the board, and I think that a lot of people started to get frustrated at this point. We signed our fair share of shite. More than half of the players signed permanently under Ronny Deila's time as manager weren't good enough. They were far from good enough. Chief Chi, waste of time. Scott Allen, we only signed so Rangers couldn't sign. Logan Bailey, remember him. Sadie Yankel, Carlton Cole, Colin Kazim-Richards. And once again, I will give a tenner to anybody who can remember Michael Duffy. This was a shocking period of time for Celtic signings. And don't get me wrong, we got a couple of absolutely cracking signings in there. Stuart Armstrong, who we'll talk about in a moment. But it was like we gave up. We were giving Ronny Deila the tools to fail. The real standout, of course, was Stuart Armstrong, who I would say is the only A-rated signing from that period of time. I know people might argue the likes of Boyata or Gordon deserve to be up there, but Gordon came in as a free signing who done his best and had his moments where he let us down. Boyata was somebody who, remember, chucked it at a time playing for Celtic. So, and Ryan Christie, I think I probably would have given an A if it wasn't for the fact that we let his contract dwindle and we didn't make as much money as we should, which isn't on him, of course, but it shows you the business at Celtic could be run better. It was a very forgettable time with Stuart Armstrong being the only real highlight. And I feel sorry for Ronny Deila sometimes, I felt sorry for him at the time. He just wasn't backed. And so entered Brendan Rodgers, the man who was trusted to take Celtic into the new era, and done just that. I mean, he is one of the main reasons, one of the more responsible figures for creating the version of Celtic we know now, the ruthless, constantly winning Celtic side. And he made some really good signings. I mean, let's go through the highlights first, because once again, just similar to Deila, I think that there's more lowlights than there is highlights, despite the success that Rodgers had. It truly makes you wonder how we ended up being so successful when you look at the success rate of signings with Brendan Rodgers in charge. The recruitment was just as bad. And I think that there's a trend that you can see forming here that as time has went on, I think that recruitment in general as a whole has got worse. I think that the success to failure ratio gets worse over time, it feels like. And I think that Brendan Rodgers' time is a real example. He was so good at getting the best out of players that he inherited. The likes of McGregor, the likes of Rodgers, the likes of Lustig. These were guys that he made better. And of course, we had the big hits of Kieran Tierney, who came through the youth academy. But that's, I think, the only real successes that Brendan Rodgers had. Which is just nuts to think about. Ayer, Dembele and Edouard, the three big money makers, the three biggest players that generated profit for Celtic. They were incredible signings. But yeah, just generally not a lot of success recruitment-wise while Rodgers was here. And history's repeating itself. So some people will disagree with my brutal assessment of some of these players, but I can't be won over on some. I mean, Gutman and Perez, we spent, albeit very little, but we spent money on them. Didn't play for Celtic. Didn't play. And we invested actual cash money into those players. Marian Shved, we spent millions on. Never got a sniff. Kundai Benyu, who I think we picked up for a development fee. Still, the amount of players like that we've signed over the years, and it makes you wonder, why are we even bothering? And I know that there's a chance that they might make it, they might come good, but they never do. And I think that whoever's in charge, whether that's Lawwell, Nicholson, whoever at that time, if it was Lee Congerton or whoever was at the club, I think they know fine well that these players are probably never going to come good. So I just wonder, what is the point? I get filling up the squad, but these are guys that never, ever, ever had a place in matchday squads. Pointless. And then, you've got your De Vrieses and your Kouassi Abuis and your Emilio Zagiri returning, and God bless who he is, a great player in his day, but there was no need for him to come back the second time. Yeah, there was just so much garbage in that time while Rodgers was in charge in his first tenure. And you know what? I get why he walked halfway through the season. I truly understand when I look back at this. Yusuf Malumbu, great. COVID, pre-COVID, the last dance for Peter Lawwell as CEO. It was the beginning of the end for him in that role, and things just didn't get better, because look through that list. Look at that list. Oh my word, we're about to have a field day here. There is arguably 3 good signings in that stretch. Now, Christopher Jullien is the most unfortunate, because without that big injury, which effectively ruined his career, he would have been a good signing. But we spent a lot of money on this guy, a guy who played, something like 30, 40 competitive games before that injury. 7 million's a lot of money at Celtic, and we never quite got the repayment for that. I really value that goal in the League Cup final right enough, but I think we can all agree that for reasons that were out of anyone's control, it didn't really work out. So I take that one away as a buy for a moment, but the rest of this is abhorrent. Taylor and Frimpong, yes, I've given Greg Taylor an A because he was here for 6 years, won so many trophies. I held down that spot when so many people came in to challenge him. I think he's deserving of that A rating, especially because we only spent a couple million quid on him. But wow, that is outrageously bad. And you can see why, going into that 2021 period of time, we were chasing Lawwell out the club. Because, I mean, if you just look at the run from 2016 onwards, this was the run that Celtic went on when it came to signings. And some people might not agree with my opinion. Some people might have more good than bad in there. But for me, I don't think there's much of an argument that can be made for some of these players. And whether they're E's or F's or D's or whatever, they're still bad signings. And there was a handful of good ones on a 5-year stretch. Which finally brings us into the modern age of the Celtic squad, the current climate at Celtic, with a lot of the players who still play for the team currently. Of course, some have left, some never really made it either, but these are players who are still here. So I'm going to go through every single one of these quickly and come back to you. It's quite difficult to rate some of them because they still are at the club and things can change, whether that's for better or for worse. But this was Lawwell returning as chairman, and I think we can all agree that his non-executive role at chairman hasn't been quite non-executive. It still feels like that he has had a very influential say at what goes on recruitment-wise, that goes on at the club. And even if he doesn't, questions are still to be asked, because when he was away, it picked up. It definitely picked up. And then we come back to a lot of nonsense. When all is said and done, I think that the 2023-24 season in general, both across summer and winter transfer windows, will go down as easily the worst in the club's history. That is outrageously bad. It's terrible. One really good signing in Nicholas Kuhn, and then no other good signings around him. Once again, how has Brendan Rodgers managed to pull off what he has in winning back-to-back doubles when you look at the recruitment? Alistair Johnston and Nicholas Kuhn, the only two really good signings Celtic have made, I think, since the return to the club by Peter Lawwell. It's been very, very bad, and it's crazy to think we are where we are. I mean, I think I've been generous. I mean, you look up here and go, wow, that's a lot. That's good grades. I think I've been generous when it comes to last season. I think it's hard to really rate it properly, especially because some of these players are still in the early days of their Celtic career. The likes of Jota has played about 5 games before getting a year-ending injury. I think it's incredibly hard to rate the signings that were made across the 24-25 campaign. That's something we'll have to revisit. But if you just pretend that's not there, and you just, let me zoom out for a moment, and you look at 2016 through 2024, that is scandalous. And that's what we've been living with as Celtic supporters. And there's my final rankings, my final gradings of Celtic's transfer business in the past 25 years. So there you have it. My very poor Excel skills have been put to test, and apologies if my numbers are slightly off, but roughly speaking, this is the ratio of what I believe is good to bad signings. And as you can see, more than half of the 154 signings that Celtic have made since 2003, I think, have been well below standard, either being incredibly poor or a total disaster. Over half. With only, just over a quarter being a right good success, I would say. That's a terrible hit rate. A terrible, terrible hit rate. And obviously this is just my assessment, but I don't think I'm mild, even though we might disagree on certain players here and there, and what I think that generally speaking, you've either got a good or a bad signing. And I think this is relative to all these players being good or bad signings. I don't think I'm miles off in any of my assessments. And in fact, you could argue I've maybe been a bit generous at times as well. And here it is. This is my chart. Just to zoom out again in case you want to see it. There you go. There's my final ratings. What a mess. Get them out. Right, this video has been far too long. Far too long. It's a special project, I suppose, for you today, so I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, like and subscribe. Let me know all your very, different opinions are down below. Right, take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.